The card sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before I actually read it, not because I forgot, because I knew what it said. My husband had told me, twice, with that particular smile he uses when he thinks he's being charming. "This one's going to surprise you, Nora. Don't peek." So I didn't. I was turning 43 in 2 weeks, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe something good was coming. We'd been married for 16 years. We had 2 kids, our son Tyler, who was 19 and home from Carlton for the summer, and our daughter Lily, who was 16 and had recently decided that being pleasant was beneath her. Our house was in Canada, west of Ottawa, one of those subdivisions where every driveway has a hockey net and every backyard has a deck that nobody uses after October. We were fine. That was the word I always used. We were fine. My husband. I'll call him my husband because that's what he was for 16 years, and I'm not ready to say his name like it's nothing. He worked in federal procurement. Long hours, a lot of travel to Toronto. The kind of job where you say, he works for the government at dinner parties and nobody asks follow-up questions. I had gone back to work part-time 3 years earlier doing bookkeeping for a small dental practice in Nepean after spending a decade at home with the kids. I was rebuilding something. I could feel it. Slowly, like circulation returning to a limb that had fallen asleep. The morning of my birthday was a Thursday. I woke up at 6:15 because I always wake up at 6:15. The other side of the bed was empty, which wasn't unusual. He often left early when he had morning meetings. I lay there for a moment, listening. The house was quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of people sleeping. The quiet of a house where nobody else is home. I told myself Tyler had gone for a run. I told myself Lily was at her friend's place even though it was a weekday. I told myself a lot of things in those first 10 minutes before I picked up my phone. There were no messages from my husband. Not a happy birthday. Not a good morning. Nothing. I went downstairs. The coffee maker was cold. There was a note on the counter, but it wasn't from him. It was a grocery list I'd written myself 2 days earlier. Milk. Greek yogurt, the good paper towels. I checked my phone again. I opened Instagram, not for any particular reason, just the reflex of someone who is trying not to think too hard. Lily had posted a reel 20 minutes earlier. Our daughter, who ignored my texts for hours at a time, who couldn't be bothered to say goodnight half the time. She had been awake at 5:30 in the morning and she had posted a reel. It was a video of a window seat on a plane. Clouds below. The CN Tower briefly visible through the gap before they climbed above it. She'd captioned it, "Finally, a real vacation. Dad knows how to do it right. Sorry, not sorry, Mom." Oh, I read it 4 times. I sat down at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, the one I'd picked out at a shop in Westboro, the one we'd eaten 10,000 meals at, and I sat there with my phone in my hand and I thought, very clearly and very calmly, this is not a surprise trip for me. I am not on that plane. My husband had taken our children on vacation on my birthday without me, and my daughter had posted about it like it was funny. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that because I've thought about it a lot since. Why I didn't cry. I think I had already used up something, some reservoir of grief without knowing it. What I felt instead was a kind of cold clarity. Like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees and suddenly everything was very sharp and very still. I texted Tyler, "Where are you?" He responded 12 minutes later, which told me he'd been awake, just choosing not to reach out. "Dad took us to Cancun. It was last minute. He said you knew." He said you knew. I put the phone face down on the table. I made coffee. I stood at the window and watched a squirrel work its way across the back fence, and I thought about the last 16 years. I thought about the 4 years I'd spent not working, not maintaining my accounting designation, letting it lapse because it was easier and he had said it was fine, we were fine. I thought about the 3 miscarriages nobody knew about except us. I thought about the anniversary trip to Kelowna we'd canceled because he had a work thing, and the Christmas in PEI we'd canceled because of the kids' schedules, and all the small surrenders that I had filed away under the word fine. He said you knew. I had not known. I picked my phone back up and texted my husband, "Happy birthday to me." He didn't respond for 2 hours. When he did, all he wrote was, "Nora, we talked about this. You said you needed a quiet birthday. I gave you quiet." I stared at that message for a long time. We had not talked about this. I had never said that. I was so certain of it that I scrolled back through months of texts looking for some version of that conversation, some thread I'd forgotten. There was nothing. He had invented it casually and completely, like a man who had practiced lying so often it had become a form of memory. Something in me shifted. Not dramatically. Not with a crash. More like a door closing very quietly in a house you're leaving. I called my sister in Mississauga. I told her what had happened. She was silent for long enough that I had to check if the call had dropped. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I think I need you to come." While I waited for her, I did something I had never done before. I opened my husband's desk in the office off the hallway. I wasn't looking for anything specific, that's what I told myself. But the thing about working in bookkeeping is that you know how money moves. You know what the statements should look like and what they look like when something is wrong. The first thing I found was a Visa bill I didn't recognize, not our joint card. A separate account in his name only, statements forwarded to the office. I sat on the floor of his office and read through 6 months of transactions. There were hotel charges, the Fairmont in downtown Toronto, twice. A boutique hotel in Montreal. Dinners at restaurants we had never been to together. A jewelry purchase at a store on Bloor Street for $1,100. Spa services. What looked like a weekend at a resort in Mont-Tremblant in February, the weekend he had told me was a departmental retreat. I'm a bookkeeper. I know how to read a number. I knew what I was looking at. My sister arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She walked in, took one look at me sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by papers and said, "Tell me everything." I told her everything. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "Maybe there's an explanation." She said, "Do you have the login for your joint accounts?" We spent the next 3 hours going through finances together. My husband's salary deposited into a joint account. Mine into a personal account I'd kept separate without ever fully understanding why. Some instinct, something left over from before. The joint account showed patterns I'd missed because I had trusted him to manage it. Extra cash withdrawals on the weekends he was away, a transfer to a savings account I didn't have access to, a few $100s here, a few hundred there, over 2 years amounting to just over $14,000, quietly moved out of what was supposed to be our shared future. I was not a woman who fell apart. I knew this about myself. I called the family lawyer that evening, a woman my sister had used for a contract review 3 years earlier, sharp, Ottawa-based, takes no pleasure in drama but does not miss a detail. I left a message. She called back within the hour. I told her the basics. She asked me to photograph everything and email it to her before I returned it to where I'd found it. She told me to do nothing else yet. She told me to sleep, if I could. I photographed everything. I returned it. I did not sleep. The next morning, I sent a single email, not to my husband, to his director at the department, a woman I had met twice at work events, professional and serious, someone who I believed would take what I sent her seriously. I was not writing out of anger, or at least I told myself that. I was writing because among the hotel charges and the dinners was a clear pattern of expense reports my husband had filed with his department for trips that were not, in fact, departmental. He had billed the government for hotels he had used for personal travel. I had the receipts. I had the dates. I had the expense reports he'd stupidly kept scanned in the same desk drawer as his private visa statements. I attached everything. Then I put my phone in my sister's bag and asked her to hold on to it for the morning because I did not want to watch for a response. I wanted to make breakfast. I wanted to sit in my own kitchen and eat eggs on my own birthday that had passed and not be the woman who sat refreshing her inbox. My sister made coffee. We sat in the backyard wrapped in sweaters. It was late August and the mornings had already turned, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with him. She told me about her kids. I told her about a podcast I'd been listening to about women who had gone back to school at 40. We sat there for a long time. When she gave my phone back at noon, there were missed calls, 2 from my husband, 1 from a number I didn't recognize, a text from Tyler that said, "Mom, Dad's phone has been blowing up. What's going on?" And an email from my husband's director's assistant acknowledging receipt of my message and noting that it had been forwarded to the department's internal audit and values and ethics office. I read that email 3 times. I won't pretend I felt nothing. I felt something I don't have a clean word for, not satisfaction, not relief exactly, but a sense of things becoming true. The shape of what had actually been happening finally visible, like a city you've been driving through in fog that suddenly clears. I called the lawyer. She had already started reviewing what I'd sent her. She told me the financial irregularities I'd documented from our joint accounts were relevant to the divorce proceedings she was beginning to prepare. She told me she'd also identified that a TFSA in my name that I'd forgotten about, opened years before we married, small, maybe $8,000, was protected, separate property. She told me what I was entitled to under Ontario family law, and she told me to write nothing down in text or email that I would not want read aloud in a courtroom. I wrote nothing down. My husband called 11 times that day. I answered once at 4 in the afternoon when the kids were due to land. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question. The voice of a man standing at the edge of something and already knowing he'd put himself there. "I found your visa statements," I said, "and your expense reports." Silence. "The kids' flight lands at 7, I said. "They can come home." "You can't. I've spoken to a lawyer. She'll be reaching out to yours." "Nora, I'm gonna go now," I said. "Tyler can call me when they land." I hung up and then I stood in my kitchen and I shook, finally, for about 90 seconds. My sister put her hand on my back and didn't say anything. Then I washed my face and I started making dinner because the kids were coming home and they would need to eat. Lily walked in at 8:30 that night and she looked at the suitcase by the door, her father's, which I had packed while she was in the air. And she looked at me, and her face did something I hadn't seen in years. She looked young. She looked like the 12-year-old who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms. "Mom," she said. "Sit down," I said. "Both of you, I'm going to tell you what happened." I told them. Not everything, they didn't need everything, but the shape of it, that their father had been dishonest with me in ways that I had not known about, that I had found out, that we were separating, that I was not asking them to choose sides, that I expected both of them, going forward, to understand that I was a person, not a fixture in this house, and that what they had done, what Lily had posted, what Tyler had not thought to warn me about, had hurt me, and I needed them to sit with that. Lily started crying. Tyler stared at the table. "I know you love your dad," I said. "I'm not asking you to stop, but I need you to hear me when I tell you that I matter. That matters to me, more than I've been letting on for a long time." Neither of them said anything for a while. Then Tyler said, "I should have texted you, Mom, before we left. He said you knew, and I believed him." "I know," I said. "And you're 19, I understand, but now you know what it looks like when someone tells you a story that makes someone else's feelings convenient to ignore. Remember how that felt to realize?" He nodded. He looked like he was going to cry too. I did not cry. I had cried at 2:30 in the morning, alone in the backyard, sitting in the dark with my sister's sweater over my shoulders and a glass of wine I barely touched. I had cried privately into that particular dark, and I had said everything I needed to say to the night sky and the turning leaves and nobody else. I was done with crying in front of people who needed me to be okay. The legal process took 8 months. My husband hired a lawyer who was very good at making things complicated. My lawyer was better at making them simple. The housing market in Ottawa being what it was, the house was worth considerably more than what we'd paid, and my share, along with the equalization of assets, gave me enough to put a down payment on a townhouse in the West End near a school Lily could finish at, not far from my sister. The government investigation into the expense reports was a separate matter that unfolded without my direct involvement. I was contacted once by an investigator who asked me to clarify the documents I'd sent. I clarified them. I don't know the full outcome. I know that my husband is no longer with the department. I know this because Tyler mentioned it carefully the way adult children mention things they know are loaded. I renewed my CPA designation. It took 6 months of self-study, evenings at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, a lot of bad instant coffee and old textbooks I ordered from a secondhand shop in Toronto. When I passed the review exam, I didn't tell anyone except my sister. She drove over with a bottle of Niagara Riesling, and we sat on my small back deck, nothing like the old deck. This one barely fits 2 chairs, and we drank it slowly and watched it get dark. "You're gonna be fine," she said. "I know," I said. And I meant it, which was different from all the years I had said it before. Lily still has some growing up to do. That's the honest version. She's not the villain of this story. She was 16, and she was with her dad, and she made a thoughtless choice that turned out to mean more than she knew. We're working on it. She apologized to me, not immediately, not fluently, but in her own time, sitting at the kitchen table one evening with a mug of tea she hadn't touched, finding the words in the slow, halting way of someone who has not had a lot of practice with them. I accepted it. I told her that apologizing is a skill and skills need to be practiced, and I was glad she was practicing. Tyler calls every Sunday. He's doing better than I expected, which I think means he's more resilient than I gave him credit for. Or maybe just that watching his mother handle something badly and then handle herself well taught him something I couldn't have taught him any other way. I planted a window box this spring. Basil, mint. One of those stubborn little tomato plants that probably won't produce anything. I look at it most mornings while I make coffee. Real coffee now. A good machine. One of the first things I bought with money that was only mine. I am not the woman I was at 43. I don't think I could go back to her even if I wanted to. She was kind and she was capable, and she had quietly agreed to become invisible, and for a long time she believed that was fine. It wasn't fine, but she made it through, and so did I. I keep thinking about the squirrel on the back fence. That morning, while I was sitting in my kitchen alone on my birthday, before I'd found the visa statements or called a lawyer or done anything at all, I watched a squirrel move along that fence like it had somewhere important to be. And for a few minutes, that was the only thing in the world that made sense to me. Everything else had come apart. But that small creature was just doing what it was built to do. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in a fatalistic way. Not like I believe the universe was arranging something on my behalf. More like things follow from other things. My husband made choices consistently over years, and those choices had a logic to them that eventually became visible. The expense reports filed for trips that weren't departmental. The cash moved out of our joint account in quiet increments. The lies told so often they became a kind of second memory for him. None of it appeared out of nowhere. And none of what followed appeared out of nowhere either. What I did, photographing those documents, sending that email, calling that lawyer, none of it felt like revenge in the moment. It felt like accuracy. Like I was finally describing the situation correctly after years of using the wrong words for it. I had called it fine. It was not fine. And once I stopped calling it fine, I could see it for what it actually was, and I could act accordingly. That's the part I want Lily to understand someday, when she's old enough. Not that her father was a bad person and deserved what happened. That's too simple and too satisfying and probably not entirely true. But that your ability to think clearly about a situation, to read it without flinching, is one of the most important things you can develop in yourself. I lost that for a while. I let convenience and comfort and the fear of disruption do my thinking for me. When I got it back, when I sat on that office floor and let myself actually see the numbers, everything else became possible. There's also something I've been trying to teach Tyler without quite saying it directly. Integrity isn't a thing you perform when someone's watching. It's what you do when the story you're being told is convenient and you choose to ask questions anyway. He was 19 and he believed his father because it was easier to believe him. I understand that. But I want him to carry the memory of the morning he found out, really found out, what believing without questioning had cost someone he loved. And then there's the year after. The CPA textbooks on the kitchen table. The bad instant coffee. The small deck with barely enough room for 2 chairs. Building something back is slower than losing it and less dramatic, and most days it doesn't feel like anything at all. It just feels like Wednesday evening, like one more chapter read, like one more morning the window box is still alive. That's what I've learned to trust. Not the dramatic moments, not the email sent, not the lawyer's voice on the phone, not even the door closed quietly on a marriage that had already been over for longer than I knew. What I trust now is the ordinary accumulation of days where I chose, again, to keep going. That's where the real work is. That's where I became someone I actually recognize.